Standard assembly of transmission and engine for grader. Because the gearbox and torque converter of a grader are a whole, we generally refer to these components as the gearbox. But in reality, the component directly connected to the engine is the torque converter. Due to the structural characteristics of the torque converter, we need to ensure a controllable range of axial clearance when connecting and installing it with the engine. At one end of the engine, a flywheel connecting plate and an elastic plate are installed, and flywheel housing connecting plate. Before starting the installation work, we need to grasp some axial dimensions of the engine end and torque converter end, and calculate the size of the adjustment pad required for the installation connection surface. Firstly, it is necessary to prepare a measuring fixture with the same diameter as the connecting plate of the flywheel housing and a certain thickness. Then measure the distance between the outer end face of the flywheel housing connecting plate and the elastic plate. And then measure and calculate the distance C between the outer end face of the flywheel housing connecting plate and the outer end face of the small end of the flywheel connecting plate. Record the values of A and C. Next, measure and calculate the distance A between the installation surface of the torque converter housing and the connection surface of the torque converter. Subtract dimension A from dimension A, and then subtract the washer thickness dimension to obtain the paper pad thickness T1 between the torque converter housing installation surface and the outer end face of the flywheel housing connecting plate. This dimension determines the thickness of the paper pad to be used. Continue to use measuring tools to calculate the distance B between the installation surface of the torque converter housing and the thrust surface of the torque converter. Subtract the AB dimension obtained by the above method and calculate the distance C between the torque converter mounting surface and the torque converter thrust surface. According to the equipment process requirements, the clearance D between the thrust surface of the torque converter and the outer end face of the small end of the flywheel connecting plate should be controlled within the range of 0 to 0.5 mm. This can determine the axial clearance here, which means adjusting the thickness of the gasket T2 equals C dimension minus C dimension and then subtracting D. The above dimensions that need to be known before installation have been obtained. According to the thickness dimensions of T1 and T2, select an appropriate number of paper pads and washers. Install them into the connecting surface of the torque converter housing and the thrust surface of the torque converter respectively, and assemble the diesel engine and converter. Apply an appropriate amount of 262 thread adhesive to the heads of 2 bolt pieces. Pre-tighten them using diagonal tightening method, and then tighten them one by one. The tightening torque of both bolts is 44 Nm. Finally, install a cover plate on the connecting housing of the flywheel disc.